Hello, church. Welcome to Leviticus 19 and 20. And you might be wondering, isn't there some place in the Bible where it tells people not to put tattoos on their body? Oh shoot, that's these chapters. What is going on here and who is doing these videos? Let's park on a couple things. I want to show you three things that you might consider today. In chapter 19, look at what it says in verse 2 already. This is a profound statement. It says, "Be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy." I want you to understand a very important truth, church. And this is a truth that I need to be reminded of as well. The rules that God gives in Scripture are not just rules for the sake of rules. They actually reflect who He is. These rules are given not because He's making them up, but because of His character and His nature. And so think about this. Then if there are certain rules, if you will, or ways that God expects me to live that I don't like, and I kind of get casual about those or don't care, what does it say about God? It actually doesn't just say, I don't like God's rules. It actually says, I don't like who God is. The ramifications of that are very severe. We could then ask ourselves, am I casual towards sin and who God is? Then if you get past that in your devotions and you keep on reading the chapter, you'll recognize that throughout the rest of the chapter 19, there's a whole bunch of commandments that are given, some of which even overlap the 10 commandments. And I want to point out that as we sift through a chapter like this and a number of commandments are given, and you'll recognize that even I don't, obviously by what I have on my finger here, don't see all of these as moral laws. And so the question is, how do we know which ones are moral laws and which ones are not? There's a simple test you can do for how to know which is a moral law. There's three things in play, okay? One is, just think about, and it's an easy to remember thing, just think about what Jesus said are the two most important commandments. That's going to give you test number 1 and 2. Does it show me how to love God? Does it show me how to love my neighbor? And then thirdly, typically when it's a moral law, we will see examples in Scripture of other people who were affected, judged by God of the same thing, not just His chosen people in the promised land, the Israelites, but other nations as well. And so you could even see, you remember what Kevin said about that yesterday. If you go back to the chapters that he mentioned in chapter 18, verse 2 and 3, and chapter 18, verse 24 to 26, and so on. And here today, in today's reading, in chapter 20, verse 23, you can see that there are laws here that there's a difference between separation laws and moral laws. When God judges another nation with exactly the same thing, it is very obviously a moral law. And so that helps us shape, what are these three tests? Does it show us how to love God, love our neighbor, and is it universal? So then when you read through chapter 19, you can sometimes see, sometimes even tucked into the same verse, you will have a moral law, and then right behind it, you'll have a separation law. And we don't have to feel bad for 1 second about not obeying that separation law. But that moral law is as true today as it ever has been. And so if you look at chapter 19, verse 18 and 19, for instance, in chapter 18, you have this law of love your neighbor as yourself. Well, using our three tests, do you think that's a moral law? Absolutely, slam dunk. Yes, the New Testament makes that very clear, very obvious, right? Well, in verse 19, look at what it says. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. Is that a moral law? Doesn't really pass test 1, doesn't really pass test 2, and I don't know any account in Scripture that would make it pass test 3. I think this is just a separation law. I don't have to worry if my shirt is partly cotton and partly polyester. It's going to be okay because this is just a separation law. Does that make sense, church? I sure hope so. Then just sift through the rest of that chapter and discover for yourself which are the separation laws that applied to them, but I don't need to worry about today. Those are obsolete, actually. So are the ceremonial ones that point to Jesus. But which are the moral laws that I need to uphold with passion and zeal? And then, if you look in chapter 20, verse 4 to 5, there's a connection from those verses to chapter 19, verse 17. In 20, verse 4 and 5, it talks about this person who closes their eyes to someone else's sin. What they know is obviously sin. And then in chapter 19, verse 17, it says, rebuke your neighbor frankly, or you share in his guilt. And 20, verse 4 and 5 say the same thing. You actually will share in their guilt if you see what they're doing and just close your eyes to it. This obviously connects to the New Testament. In John 7, Jesus said to make proper judgments. In Matthew 7, I know he said, don't go pointing out someone else's speck before you take out your beam in your eye. But he didn't say, never go talk to them about their speck. He just said, make sure you take care of yours first, right? There's an order to that. Church, you could ask this question. Are you willing to approach people about their sin? And are you willing to be approached about yours? That is a moral law that applies to you and me today. Celebrate these things with the Lord and spend time with him today.